Thank you very much. So I guess where I start is where does the family fit into recovery? And before I go any further, I just want to go through the types of family work we do at Royal Melbourne. We do it pretty much as core business, I guess, in the sense that everybody who does work on the unit, wherever possible, we just try to think about the family. Doesn't necessarily mean we have a program as such every single time, but it's really about even that informal contact of just trying to engage family when you see them, of recognising how important they are in recovery, also how difficult it is for them as well. So I think seeing that side of it, also the other side of being able to know the family that little bit better in terms of their patients. So when we do see patients, we actually have met the family member where possible. That might include visiting hours, it might include a range of things. So I guess I start with the informal first, which often it's kind of just taken for granted, but actually that's often the engagement process that really does help. So going through inpatients, we do family therapy, which Colin Reese runs, and our staff generally would sit in on family therapy and sit with the family and patient, and I guess it enables everyone to be on the same page. It's usually a single session group, but the family has the opportunity, the patients have the opportunity to ask for another session if they'd like to. It's offered to all families on the ward, and look, the take-up is quite good actually. On the odd occasion, I think this is around word of mouth, and that's so much part of it, is where the take-up's low, word of mouth has kind of gone down a little bit, and it's really about getting that back up and getting it really active. Ward round, we obviously offer all patients to bring their families in, to bring friends in, to really be as supportive as possible, because at the end of the day, when they are discharged, ultimately it's the families and friends who are there to support them as much as possible. That's what we would hope for. So really encouraging that and trying to make it as real as possible, so being really clear about that we're not here to judge them, we're just here to see if we can support as much as we can. Family meetings are offered to all patients on the ward. Again, the take-up is it's pretty good, really, and word of mouth. So where we have a lot of word of mouth, we do really well, and then occasionally get a little slump, and it's about getting that back up again. Some of the sort of constraints that always happen are around time, or also sort of the sudden discharge, which you may not be able to plan, or the public holiday, or whatever it might be. And what we've learnt to kind of get around that is also to do some post-discharge meetings. Interestingly, we've actually found some of them to be even more helpful because the patient has actually gone home. A reality's hit in. So while they were kind of, you could almost say, pissed off for being on the ward, when they got home, they were like, oh my God, it's so hard. Yeah, I need help. Where perhaps they wouldn't have said so much in the family meeting. They were just more about, well, when am I getting out of here? I'm kind of done. So it's interesting to see where it is. And timing, I think, is an interesting thing. And I guess if you had resources, the idea would be to do both, where you could. But sometimes you don't have that. In terms of across all programs, we do Building Hope. I really can't say enough about the program. It really enables families from all the service to be involved. Loida, who's here today, runs it with me. And the feedback really is just how much families really need information. They really do. They just want to ask. They want to help. They're not really sure how to help. And I think that's the message that I get from families every day. It's just that. The other one I should have put in there, and it's really a big flaw of mine, is the transition program, which is actually my program. So complete error. The transition program, families are quite involved in that because I work with RCH and assist patients to move over to our service. Families are involved all the way along that, and as much as they need to, and it's really hard for a family to sort of, one, support their child, but also to feel like they're handing them from one service to the next service. So there's lots of issues from a family's perspective, and from a patient's perspective, there's lots of issues too, because as sort of discussed earlier, the style of treatment is very different in terms of how much families are involved and what happens at an adult hospital. And at the same time, you always have to question, it doesn't necessarily have to change completely as well. So one of the things I do talk with all patients about is the fact that you can actually invite your family in if you'd like to. It's certainly your choice. You don't need to go and say it's an adult hospital and that's it for me. We can't have family involved any further, which is often a fear, and they often don't say that. On the other hand, there's lots of them who go there and say, well, I don't want my family involved anymore, and it's how do you support the family around that, and how can you explain to them this may be kind of a period of stage where they're experimenting with where they're at. And Building Hope is just great for that, because you don't necessarily have to have a patient's consent to do Building Hope. And I think that really does give them some support. So I'm just going to move quickly through it. I run some of the family programs on day patients. And in terms of I guess I'll give you a bit of a structure. The group runs, so day patients is different to other people's day patients. Ours runs for 10 weeks over a closed period. We have around 5 patients each time. So I run the group on a Friday morning, and it basically looks at family and family dynamics, and it's set up over the 10-week period, as you can see there. It's based on accelerated trust. which is kind of an interesting concept. I mean, I guess we do it a little bit radically in the sense that we sort of say to them, look, you can imagine it's kind of like a Friday happy hour without any drugs. It's your deep and meaningful time. It's the time we really ask everyone just to absolutely give everything of yourself, to not be embarrassed or whatever, to say, I can't talk about this or that. We absolutely say everything, we're in for it, we're going to do it together, and we do it very strong. So we start hard. The engagement, I guess, is around just saying accelerated trust. We can do it, and we just imagine that that's where they're at, and they do it. So it's quite interesting doing that. We have already talked to them when we have so when they interview for day patients, we have a family information night as well. On that night, families are invited along, and at that time, they're told that there will be a family group later on. They'll be invited to that. They're also talked about family therapy and some other things that I'll go through soon. So these patients know that their families will be coming along to these groups, and that the same expectations of them will be after the family, so accelerated trust, and that they really will be in there, and it's really about lively participation. And it's really a very passionate group. It's quite interesting to run. So what we do is getting to know the real you, family values. Week 3 is where we invite the families in. Then week 4, 5 and 6 is kind of similar. We look at family dynamics, communication, relationships. Week 7, again, we invite the families back to discuss readiness and change. And then finally, we look at weeks 8, 9 and 10. And 9 and 10 are actually part-time day patient programs. So it's really around discharge, where do they go from there, and families actually thinking about what happens from there. So week 3, which is our first week where we invite the families in, the aims are to actively engage and involve family friends as part of the recovery process to strengthen the existing relationships, to share life stories in a safe and open environment. So really how we go about that is we have everyone sitting down, we do a few engagement activities, and then from there we have patients just moving around and meeting each family member, or the groups of families depending on who's come in. It could also be friends. So I guess it's really about identifying the fact that ideally you don't want to just be alone in the world. That's what we talk about. And what that actually means to say, I've got nobody to bring in. Because nobody has nobody. Once you work on it, everyone's someone. They say, well, I sort of have someone. So it's really about just saying, well, let's just bring whoever that is and let's work with that. So the person has a chance to, share their life story, so share what it's like to have an eating disorder, and people have a chance to talk about what it's like to live with someone with an eating disorder. And I think swapping those perspectives, even though there's a lot of similarity, there's also enough differences that they can actually relate to people's stories and actually learn something else from it. And I think there's a level of empathy from each other. And reducing the stigma, sort of that white elephant in the room. I think anecdotally, that's what patients and the families say, is that they just go away feeling like they were normal, and they actually felt like, so people had an eating disorder, but we just did normal stuff. We talked about real life stuff, and that's what it really is about. So it's peer support, education, and probably the most important of all, we end with a social fun morning tea, which the word fun, I guess, is really about that group. That's what it really is about. Whilst we do all this other stuff, the highlight is to say, you may have an eating disorder, but you're still entitled to have fun. And that's a true part of recovery. If you can't see that you're entitled to that, that's where we need to move to. So it's about saying it is okay. And they actually do have, and a lot of people say this is the first time I've laughed in a very long time, openly and comfortably, in this kind of environment. So I guess just around the morning tea stuff, sometimes with morning tea, remembering they're on a meal plan, generally speaking, they've got quite set snacks and stuff according to the meal plan. And they're also, this is quite new for them, most of them have come from sort of the non-eating environment to kind of like your 6 meals a day. So their snacks are, your muesli bar, your whatever it might be. It's quite a regular, it's in their head, they've planned it quite clearly. So we're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We do a spread morning tea, and we talk about how that's a social kind of environment, how you might do that at work or somewhere else. So in a way, it's a bit of meal support, but it's done in a very, very informal kind of environment. We encourage, social chit-chat and that kind of thing. So week 7, which is the follow-up one. So basically, it wouldn't always be the same family members, but a lot of times it is. If it isn't, it doesn't matter either. We work with that as well. So you can bring in new family members, you can bring in other friends, you can bring in whatever you thought was helpful for your recovery. So follow-up progress, continue to actively involve the family, develop communication and coping skills. We do a lot of exploring where to from here. Talking about the reality of that the program is going to finish. It's a very, very intense program. So for a lot of them, they're really anxious about what happens from there. And talking to family members about what that might look like, in terms of their support. How much do they support? How little do they support? What is actually helpful? We go around and discuss different kind of scenarios that we've learnt. We look at the a willingness and action plan, actually the Russ Harris one. I find that really helpful because they work as pairs or as a little group around that. They also switch around a little bit too, so people have a chance to kind of like, I guess, to have a look at someone else's action plan and sort of look at what does work and what might not work in that, what they might have skipped. And from someone with an eating disorder, it's really interesting when they're able to actually say to somebody else, yeah, but you've missed out this, and I think maybe that's your eating disorder, putting that through. And also for family members to kind of see how you can support someone, and it's not about judging them and not feeling so, I guess, guilty. There's a lot of guilt coming from families at times, and it makes it really hard for them to know how much they should support and not support, and it's just difficult. So it gives them a chance to just really think it through. Then we end here with our fun social lunch, and we up it again to pizza. And as most people know, pizza's a bit of a fear food, and it's certainly not considered safe for most people with an eating disorder. And we deliberately choose that. A lot of people sort of say, oh, you know, it's sort of pushing it far. They know from the beginning there's nothing hidden in that. And I guess it's around saying, this is real, this is about what you can do, and let's just do it. And interestingly, lots of the patients who sort of say, I could never do that, they do it just absolutely fine. There's no issues whatsoever. We asked them why it was fine, what made it fine. They say because it was social, because it was fun, because that's what I just felt like it was okay to do it there, and that degree of acceptance. And I think for family and friends to see that we can get there gives everyone a chance to believe, and I guess in a sense that building hope of saying, well, there is hope here, and there's hope for everyone in that room of saying we can get somewhere. So it's a lot of motivational work too in there. So I evaluated, all the programs I should say throughout the unit are evaluated, but I'm just going to present on this group and later on a few others. This is probably the evaluation dating back from around 12 months. And in terms of the expectations coming to the sessions, I guess in terms of the patients, generally speaking, there was definitely nervousness, worried, scared, also interested in hearing other people's stories. I thought the last one was nice, pretty high, since it's a serious program. You know, I think just different kind of visions of it. In terms of family and friends, I think the first comment really says it all. They were just really pleased to be invited. I think to know that this is how the program works. For family members, if you have a patient in a day patient program, you have 5 opportunities to come in and do a family kind of session. It might be a group, it might be therapy, it might be meal support. So it's pretty intense, and I think they really thought, wow, I really am involved part of this treatment, so, you know, let me see what I can learn and get out of it. Good to meet everyone, and again, reflecting on where things are at. So there were lots of kind of... did you learn anything about eating disorders you didn't previously know? So 52% of the patients said no. And interestingly, 66% said yes. I think that says just a lot of where we're at. It's also the fact that the patients are doing a day patient program. So we would assume that they've probably learned a lot about eating disorders. This is week 3 and week 7. You would hope they've learned a lot. They probably also have had some inpatient stays and a number of other things. So I actually think it's probably genuine. They genuinely probably didn't learn a lot about the eating disorder. They learned more about life itself and about life skills. These family members, I think, perhaps knew something about life skills, but the eating disorder themselves, they didn't get it. So even some of the very, very basic points where patients, we go around to patients and say, if you had the chance to tell the world about something that would help you understand eating disorder better, so that everyone gets a chance to say something. And one of the things most patients would say is just to remember, I'm me, I'm not the eating disorder. And it's amazing how many families are like, oh, I never thought of that. So it's a really basic level, some of the stuff you're at. So I guess it shows it's quite a powerful way of learning. Did you learn anything about the eating disorder you didn't previously know? So some of the comments, so some of the patients said that an eating disorder can make you feel safe like a friend. That was an interesting one, and I think that discussion really got people going because a family member said to them, a different family member said, well, I feel like by you having that, that's how you'll not be close to your family again because you've got this big thing. And this patient actually was one of those ones, perhaps a little more defensive, and she said, oh, no, it's not like that. Lots of discussion occurred, and she said, and that's what she put up in the end. She said, I really understand it now. I really realise why I can't quite get better because I won't let this friend go. So therefore, I can't get to that next step. So there was lots of discussion around, and very real discussions around different things. I understand my eating disorder better now. It's not just about food. Learn more about myself. The I am in action is around where she is in terms of the change process. The family, I guess understanding that there's so many layers to an eating disorder. Depends on the individual. Not to feel so overwhelmed, supported, that sort of stuff. How long it affects a patient for, how exhausting. This is actually one of the aims of it. An indirect aim is for family members to recognise how hard these patients are actually working. because it's easy just to measure someone and say, well, you didn't recover. You didn't recover. You still haven't recovered, you know. But if when they come in and they do 2 hours of this, and the first one's usually two hours, the second one about 2.5 hours, once they've done those, they come up, they're just exhausted. The families are just wrecked. They're like, I can't believe I've worked so intense. This is way harder than I've done at work, all this sort of stuff. And I think it really does give them that feedback of saying these patients are working really hard and maybe we need to give them a bit of a break too. Yeah, they're difficult. Yes, they manipulate. Yes, there's lots of things going on. But they're real people who are trying really hard. And the last comment I think is a big one. They need my support, not pity. Every session I've run, one parent has always sort of said in the group discussions where they go meet the patients, I feel so sorry for you. I can't say how sorry I feel. And one of the patients, at least one, but usually more, have always said, I don't want you to feel sorry. I don't want to be a victim. And it's a message that it really comes out of that group of saying we need to look at it from a different angle. So at least if families can start seeing it from a different side, that's a helpful thing too. And it helps them also combat a lot of that guilt that a lot of families feel. 100% of the families said they would recommend the session to other patients and families. In terms of patients, we can only hope the first one I'm actually doing right now. The second one, I would love mum to come to this session. This is, I guess, coming back to how do you involve family members. So even though we do say from the very, very beginning, we have a high expectation that you bring family, friends, somebody, because we don't believe that anyone should be in this world with nobody. That's kind of where we come from. So this girl really did want to bring her mum all the way through it, but she kept saying she'll just be overwhelmed. She was just really, really protective of her mother. She kept saying she'll be totally overwhelmed to see other people with eating disorders. It will freak her out, all these sorts of things. So in the end, we said to her, why don't you come along? You see how the session runs. See what you think, and if you're happy with it, then you could invite her to the next one, which is actually what she said. I'd love my mum to come to the next session. In terms of support for her, my question was always, how would you go without having a family or friend there in a group where everyone else has them? So what we arranged was a social work student to sit with her and kind of supported her through it a little bit. But she actually commented that it was absolutely no issue whatsoever, that it was such an open group that it was not a problem. So it was kind of interesting. It's real. I'd recommend it to other families. In terms of families, down the other side, the time commitment is worth it. Support and information from others is good. Help me to believe in her progress. I think the time commitment's a good one too, because we actually request quite a lot of time from families and day patient. And it seems like people are just happy to do it. We don't really have families saying, I can't make it. It's pretty rare. Final comments. I think I'll just cover some quickly. Basically, there was a lot of discussion around is longer time needed or not. So when we started, we used to only run the week 3 one, and we used to run it for around an hour and a half. Then we got feedback from that. We increased it to 2 sessions, an hour and a half each. Then we've increased it to 2 hours each. Now we've increased it to 2 hours and 2.5 hours. I don't know if it'll ever be enough. I'm not sure. So I don't know. I mean, I could add another one. I don't really know where that goes. But it's an interesting one. I think it just says that they really do want to be involved and they like this kind of creative environment where I guess the balance is quite equal in the group. It really is. More goal-setting opportunities. I think that was a good one from patients in terms of what does really help with recovery. Stepping stones, goal-setting, all that sort of stuff really does help them. Definitely worth a trip down. So just reconfirming that sometimes, you know, in terms of is it putting people too far? A lot of these are country families too, where we often think, oh, they wouldn't do it. They do it. Keeping conversation somewhat organic was really helpful. If I was to summarise how the group works, that's it. It really is grassroots level of, I guess, just right from the real beginning. So family therapy. In terms of family therapy, it's included as part of the day patient program, so everybody knows that they would be asked to do a family therapy session. And I should at this point also thank Martin from Seed who helped us get to this point. Without Martin, I don't think we'd have anything here. So Martin stayed with us for around 18 months and helped us get a lot of the program going. So in terms of family therapy, I think most people probably know the main goals of it. We run it in terms of a single session group. Our number one focus is engagement, and I think the model of day patient and all the family works really nicely because we meet the family at family information night at the beginning. We run the 2 family groups. We have family therapy, so by the time they get here, we actually know the families reasonably well. We know the patients reasonably well. We're pretty equal with it, so it actually does help a lot. We don't have to do a lot of engagement in the actual session, which is kind of nice. And I think the families know enough about the program to understand that there's a reason we have non-negotiables and all that sort of stuff. We don't really have to discuss it too much. So we do a pre-session survey questionnaire. It's given to all patients to give to their family members. Majority are done, and in that they complete sort of what issues they might like to talk about or whatever, and we do that in the session. Appointments are booked in the very first week of the program, the reason being that, one, for organisation, but the biggest thing of all, I think, is to take away the anxiety, so that patients actually know it's on that week, and they kind of deal with it. In some way, it's more acceptable than knowing, I don't know when it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And I think it's just like, okay, that's my week, and they're okay with that. A therapeutic letter is always done for every session, and the reason being is that, like with most sort of any type of counselling, but especially family therapy, you often leave a session and you forget, probably 75% of what's been discussed. So it gives them a chance to summarise what happened. But also a little bit of an action plan is in the letter as well, so they can kind of go through it, they can share it with their loved ones if they'd like to, or they could just remember it themselves. So that's always done within around 2 to 3 days of the session. And then we have meal support that follows on, but I'll cover meal support a little later. So in terms of family therapy, so in terms of the patients, 44% that said that family therapy was extremely useful, 45% said it was useful. In terms of the families, 42% said it was extremely useful and 41% said it was very useful. So families probably marked it slightly higher. I think generally speaking it was quite useful. My fear would be that patients would rate it a little bit hard in the sense of, yeah, it was useful, but I've still not recovered. I still have my ongoing problems. Families came with more specific kind of things they wanted to deal with. So they might have said, I want to know how to support her on one of her bad days. So quite a specific, we could talk about specific plans. Sometimes patients had specific plans, and we would answer those, but at the end there was always that, but I'm still not there. And so I think that is a reality of kind of where you're at and how hard it is to recover. The most difficult part about the session, intense to talk about real issues, hard to ask for support. That's one of the huge ones that comes out in the group as well. Lots of the patients talk about knowing they need to ask for support, but just not knowing how to make themselves vulnerable. And some of them saying that they know that they ask for support and things they actually don't need help on when they really should be asking on the other things, but they can't get themselves to do the other bit. So there's kind of that twofold. Talking about issues, being open and vulnerable with their mother, not being 100% sure of what would be addressed. I think that's a really, that's the anxiety of having an eating disorder. That always, I'm just never quite 100% sure of what's going to happen. And therefore I feel a little unsafe. So it sort of comes back to that. Hearing the sadness from the family side, trying to say the right things to help with the problem, emotion, and then the last few I guess were around that the environment did feel quite safe for them, and they 100% said they would recommend the program. The session was helpful in the following areas. So in terms of the patient side, I guess they rated understanding how your family functions as the highest. And I think that's interesting because often when you ask them how their family functions, they really don't seem to have too much of an idea. A lot of them will say a few things, and I wonder if it's because they're very blinkered from the eating disorder. How much can they actually see beyond the eating disorder? And often the comments that they say are actually around their eating disorder. So they might say, oh, well, mum's the boss of the house because she decides the meals, she decides it's a lot around the food. But when I sort of say, what about the everyday functioning? They struggle more with kind of what those comments might be. And the second one was allowing an opportunity to change. So they sort of put them as the highest. In terms of the family, opportunity to change, they rated the highest too. But they also said helping to deal with your problem as the kind of the next highest. And I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, for patients, ultimately their problem is I want to recover, if you really look at it. But for families, sometimes it's a bit more specific and they actually can get that answer. Here you also notice, though, learning about the nature of illness is rated higher than the patients. So again, they learnt more about the eating disorder through the therapy and that kind of thing than patients probably did. And I think also, again, because they've already done day patient program, we'd assume some of them inpatients had lots more therapy and information about that kind of thing. So, family meal support. So family meal support was introduced, we had it probably around 4 years ago on the unit, and we had staffing resources and all sorts of things, and that's really why it faded out, not for any other reason than that. But it's always been something that it's just been around. We've always just wanted to do it, we've never been able to work out how we can actually make it work in a kind of a simple way. And I think what we have worked out is that it flows on really nicely from family therapy. It sort of sounds unusual in a sense. Originally we were thinking, was that just too overwhelming? But actually the point is it doesn't need to be overwhelming. So we do family therapy and it's reasonably comfortable. It comes to an end, we say, we've done a great job today, do an evaluation, and we say, why don't we just go next door and we'll have our lunch. It works really quite nicely. In terms of the meal support, so what happens is there's always that practical side of things. Before family therapy, we meet with the family and the patient, and they have a bit of a chat about what sort of takeaway food they'd like to order. Don't do hospital food. We try to keep it as real as we can, and we sort of say, let's, what do you feel like? The local ones around, we have lots of local menus, and, a bit of a review on which menu's the better one. And so they'll order their food, and then by the time they finish their family therapy, it's lunchtime, and we just go next door, and we have our lunch and that sort of thing. So it works out quite well, and I think the aims of meal support are probably pretty common to most people. So in terms of the session, like I said, this is quite new. We've only just started it now, and it's because I guess we've realised we can actually do it. We do it within an hour, so we don't take a long time doing it. And the nice part is we've usually, not everybody has done work on their meal plans, but often in family therapy, some of the things the patients have talked about is, I'm only doing 95% of my meal plan and I can't get that last bit in, or I struggle with supper. So often lots of discussions have already occurred around some ideas that would help. So we can actually apply it almost immediately. In terms of the patients, I think the patients rated it slightly lower, but still reasonably okay, and families were a little bit up the higher end. Most challenging aspects of meal support. So talking about an eating disorder whilst eating. That one was an interesting one, and I sort of thought, I don't know about this, maybe we've gone the wrong way about it. It's like, that's not great. Anyway, I had a bit of a chat with her about that, just to see what her thoughts really were around that kind of thing. And what she was saying was she was just really worried that the eating disorder thoughts were going to come up. And I said to her, did they or didn't they? And she said, no, they didn't at all. And I thought, that's interesting. She said, the reason probably was because it is a very, very supportive environment. No one was anxious in the room. She said, one of the things that happens at home is everyone's anxious, because we're all anxious, and no one was anxious actually in the room at all. It was very social, it was fun. And she said, I was just so surprised the first time it's never come up. So I sort of thought, I guess that's what we need to deal with. Portion sizes was a big one. So needing some assurance from Zara, our dietitian, to make sure it was the right amount. Meal support, I should say, I do it with myself and the day patient coordinator or the dietitian, so we kind of switch around a little bit. So it's only an hour of time and you already have the family there, the patient there, so it kind of works nicely, eating around other people. In terms of the family and friends, this I think just shows how different it is. It wasn't challenging, felt really supported, just wanted my daughter to feel comfortable, and she seemed to be, wasn't too challenging. So I think it's such a different aspect, but it really enabled them to see how difficult it is for patients, but the fact that they can do it if we kind of support them in a way that's helpful. What have you learnt today and how could you apply it? So using the strategies to, like talking, communicating, to go out and challenge myself. That was really around a part of day patient, I think, with all parts of recovery. They really get stuck at a certain point and they just don't know how to get to that next step. So lots of the family work we do in meal support is around how could they actually make a real kind of social challenge. So it might be, look, why don't you leave here, you've had lunch now, and do afternoon tea on the way home. You might just do it right now, and then you've done it, and that's it. So just getting things to happen, because the more they can practice it, the less the fear is. Practicing portion size with family meals at home with my meals. For this patient, she really did struggle with portion size, and that's one of the reasons we do takeaway, because generally speaking it comes in a shared container, and we present that in that way, and we ask everyone just to kind of help themselves. And also the idea that you can share food is kind of a big thing for people with eating disorders, so really putting that out there and really talking about what does it mean, and also how important it is as part of that social ritual of life, and reconnecting yourselves and reviewing in a positive kind of framework. Putting into practice what we've talked about and challenge myself. And then on the family side, to continue to support her, help with a variety of snacks. This was a great one, I thought, because this mother came in and the patient was the same. He said, well, I'm pretty good. I've done 100% of my meal plan and I'm good. And that was that. And we were sitting there thinking, which she does do 100%, but it's the safest 100% you've ever seen. And so it was really around talking about that. And the mother really never knew that. She'd never seen that side of it. She had no idea. She said, the whole time I just thought that was it, we're done. So it was quite interesting, so variety of snacks and all that kind of discussion, and where do you go from there. And the patient was really like, I'm really pleased to be pulled up on this in a sense. And that was, she said, I was pleased I got 100%, but at the same time, I kind of knew I had to go the next step. But I was kind of happy my mother wasn't telling me, but I'm also really pleased that she's now on side again, and she does get where we need to go, and she's with me on the journey, and we will get there to the next level. So there's lots of different ways you can interpret anything. Then I can sit with her at meal times and make social conversation. Again, this one This one was a result, I think, of a patient who had a lot of FBT. It hadn't worked out so well. They'd had significant traumas. The parent had died, the other parent. So lots of sadness, lots of grief. And I think it got to the point where this parent just wasn't sure how to be effective at a mealtime, and thought, well, the best way to do that maybe is just to move away and let them do their own meals. They're 18 now. You do it your own way. And, you know, I'll support you, but I'll support you from a distance. So a lot of the conversation was, and it took a lot for her to say that, was, I just want you to be with me at the meal. You don't need to eat the meal. I just want you to have a cup of coffee and chat with me. It took her a lot to say it. We did all the family therapy work, and then it continued through this, and then finally she was able to say, look, that's just all I want. I just want you to be there and just chat and make it normal. He was really, really surprised to hear that that's all he had to do. And he said, I just thought there were so many things I had to learn. I just didn't think I could ever do them. But so I guess it's about keeping it simple at times. Using all the different ideas to help and support before, during and after meals, and keep supporting and encouraging just normal meals and social situations. So really just reassurance and just knowing what they needed to do. And 100% said they would recommend meal support. Again, it's a very small number, but I think we would continue this kind of model and just see where we go, and hopefully, in a year's time we'll have better stats. So that's all. Thank you. For a family to sort of, one, support their child, but also to feel like they're handing them from one service to the next service. So there's lots of issues from a family's perspective. And from a patient's perspective, there's lots of issues too, because as sort of discussed earlier, the style of treatment is very different in terms of how much families are involved and what happens in an adult hospital. And at the same time, you also have to question, it doesn't necessarily have to change completely as well. So one of the things I do talk with all patients about is the fact that you can actually invite your family in if you'd like to. It's certainly your choice. You don't need to go and say it's an adult hospital and that's it for me. We can't have family involved any further, which is often a fear, and they often don't say that. On the other hand, there's lots of them who go there and say, well, I don't want my family involved anymore, and it's how do you support the family around that, and how can you explain to them this may be kind of a period of stage where they're experimenting with where they're at. And Building Hope is just great for that, because you don't necessarily have to have a patient's consent to do Building Hope. And I think that really does give them some support. So I'm just going to move quickly through it. I run some of the family programs on day patients. And in terms of I guess I'll give you a bit of a structure. The group runs, so day patients is different to other people's day patients. Ours runs, patient has actually gone home. A reality's hit in. So while they were kind of, you could almost say, pissed off for being on the ward, when they got home, they were like, oh my God, it's so hard. Yeah, I need help. Where perhaps they wouldn't have said so much in the family meeting. They were just more about, well, when am I getting out of here? I'm kind of done. So it's interesting to see where it is. And timing, I think, is an interesting thing. And I guess if you had resources, the idea would be to do both, where you could. But sometimes you don't have that. In terms of across all programs, we do Building Hope. I really can't say enough about the program. It really enables families from all the service to be involved. Loida, who's here today, runs it with me. And the feedback really is just how much families really need information. They really do. They just want to ask. They want to help. They're not really sure how to help. And I think that's the message that I get from families every day. It's just that. The other one I should have put in there, and it's really a big flaw of mine, is the transition program, which is actually my program. So complete error. The transition program, families are quite involved in that because I work with RCH and assist patients to move over to our service. Families are involved all the way along that, and as much as they need to, and it's really hard. Thank you very much. So I guess where I start is where does a family fit into recovery? And before I go any further, I just want to go through the types of family work we do at Royal Melbourne. We do it pretty much as core business, I guess, in the sense that everybody who does work on the unit, wherever possible, we just try to think about the family. It doesn't necessarily mean we have a program as such every single time, but it's really about even that informal contact of just trying to engage family when you see them, of recognising how important they are in recovery, also how difficult it is for them as well. So I think seeing that side of it, also the other side of being able to know the family that little bit better in terms of their patients. So when we do see patients, we actually have met the family member where possible. That might include visiting hours. It might include a range of things. So I guess I start with the informal first, which often it's kind of just taken for granted, but actually that's often the engagement process that really does help. So going through inpatients, we do family therapy, which Colin Reese runs, and our staff generally would sit in on family therapy and sit with the family and patient, and I guess it enables everyone to be on the same page. It's usually a single session group, but the family has the opportunity, the patients have the opportunity to ask for another session if they'd like to. It's offered to all families on the ward, and look, the take-up is quite good actually. On the odd occasion, I think this is around word of mouth, and that's so much part of it, is where the take-up's low, word of mouth has kind of gone down a little bit. And it's really about getting that back up and getting it really active. Ward round, we obviously offer all patients to bring their families in, to bring friends in, to really be as supportive as possible, because at the end of the day, when they are discharged, ultimately it's the families and friends who are there to support them as much as possible. That's what we would hope for. So really encouraging that and trying to make it as real as possible, so being really clear about that we're not here to judge them, we're just here to see if we can support as much as we can. Family meetings are offered to all patients on the ward. Again, the take-up is it's pretty good, really, and word of mouth. So where we have a lot of word of mouth, we do really well, and then occasionally get a little slump, and it's about getting that back up again. Some of the sort of constraints that always happen are around time, or also sort of the sudden discharge, which you may not be able to plan, or the public holiday, or whatever it might be. And what we've learnt to kind of get around that is also to do some post-discharge meetings. Interestingly, we've actually found some of them to be even more helpful, because the 10 weeks over a closed period, we have around 5 patients each time. So I run the group on a Friday morning, and it basically looks at family and family dynamics, and it's set up over the 10-week period, as you can see there. It's based on accelerated trust, which is kind of an interesting concept. I mean, I guess we do it a little bit radically in the sense we sort of say to them, look, you can imagine it's kind of like a Friday happy hour without any drugs. It's your deep and meaningful time. It's the time we really ask everyone just to absolutely give everything of yourself, to not be embarrassed or whatever, to say, I can't talk about this or that. We absolutely say everything, we're in for it, we're going to do it together, and we do it very strong. So we start hard. The engagement, I guess, is around just saying accelerated trust. We can do it, and we just imagine that that's where they're at, and they do it. So it's quite interesting doing that. We have already talked to them when we have so when they interview for day patients, we have a family information night as well. On that night, families are invited along, and at that time, they're told that there will be a family group later on. They'll be invited to that. They're also talked about family therapy and some other things that I'll go through soon. So these patients know that their families will be coming along to these groups, and that the same expectations of them will be after the family, so accelerated trust.